Magic. What comes to your mind? Maybe mysterious rituals, ancient books, and forces we can feel but can't measure. And science? What about now? White coats, laboratories, equations, and relentless logic. It seems like these are two completely different worlds, one based on faith and the other on evidence. There's an insurmountable gap between them, which that little word versus only confirms. But is the contrast really that sharp? Isn't the whole thing a bit oversimplified? If we look back into history, we find that the picture is much more complex. Take alchemy, for example. It was the precursor to modern chemistry, but at the same time it was full of mysticism, symbols and elements that today we would unhesitatingly classify as belonging to the realm of magic. The boundary between the two worlds was barely noticeable here. Or take Isaac Newton, an icon of the scientific revolution. He too is said to have been deeply involved in alchemy and even in the interpretation of biblical prophecies. For many great mystics of the past, these were not necessarily opposites, but rather different paths to knowledge. It seems then that the strict opposition between magic and science is more of a modern construct. Modern science needed to define itself methodologically and positioned itself against everything it considered unverifiable and irrational. What is fascinating, however, is how strong this notion of opposition remains even today. Why does the connection between magic and science still attract us so much? Maybe it says something about us, about our deeper human needs. On one hand, we long for order, explanation and control, which science offers us. On the other hand, we are fascinated by the mysterious, the inexplicable. Maybe it's also a longing for meaning, which purely rational science can't always provide. Science gives us tools to understand the world and to change it. But it doesn't answer the question why, and what lies beyond the limits of what we know so far. And maybe that's exactly where the allure of magic comes into play. Moreover, that boundary is constantly shifting. Let's take a look at the placebo effect, a scientifically studied phenomenon where mere belief affects our bodies. Isn't there perhaps an echo here of the ancient connection between mind and matter, something so close to magical traditions? Or the research into consciousness, which still represents a huge mystery for science. And that brings us back to that little word versus. Maybe we don't need this supposed conflict at all. Maybe magic and science aren't enemies. They're just two different languages describing the same reality. One speaks the language of symbols and experience, and the other the language of evidence and measurement. Science gives us verifiable tools for how the world works, but the other side, let's call it intuition, magic, or experience, helps us search for the answer to the question, why? And perhaps, in order to truly understand the world, we desperately need both.